Hi, everyone. I'm happy to share with you today tools and templates that can make every change manager know exactly how things are going and help you figure out what to do and when. Hi, welcome. I'm April Callis-Birchmeier. I'm excited to share with you today because I'm a certified change management professional and project management professional. And today I'm really looking forward to talking about tools and templates that every change practitioner needs. And I really love this topic because I didn't always know the tools and templates I needed. And once I started to discover what would be really helpful, I created my own. And I want to share those with you to make sure that you know, as a change practitioner or as a project manager who is leading change, I want to work with you to show you some of these tools, some of the templates that I use that are essential to getting the work done. And I also want to include the fact that it's helpful to have a tool or a template to gather data, gather information. And you can also use your favorite AI tool to kind of reach out and figure out what is the best, what's the very best kind of tool for you to use. So I think that that's important to recognize is that we don't have to complete everything by hand anymore. We can start, we can describe what we're looking for with our AI partners, and then we can start to gather data and feed the data into the tool that we're working with. But I'm going to talk about three tools in particular today. And the three tools that I wanted to really mention to you today, the first one is just essential. And I always think of it as really the backbone of an entire change. You cannot have change adoption without this tool, and that is the stakeholder assessment, stakeholder identification assessment tool. Now, I use a very customized stakeholder identification assessment tool, and I'll describe it to you in a few moments. But I really think that whatever we can do to really figure out who those stakeholders are, that's essential for the change, right? Understanding our stakeholder groups, understanding our internal stakeholders, our external stakeholders, those ancillary groups who are also very impacted by the change. And remember that our stakeholders are impacted by the change in some way. So even those who are maybe downstream, don't experience the change up close, but will have the result of the change kind of um, impacting them in some form, they are also stakeholders and need to be included in thinking about and identifying our stakeholders. So I do have the stakeholder assessment, the identification assessment tool, which we'll talk about in a moment. I also feel like a very important tool for all change practitioners is the change impact assessment. So this change impact assessment is really what I consider kind of figuring out how big is the bread box, right? Which doesn't make any sense anymore. Nobody has a bread box. But I think that the change impact assessment helps you ask the questions that need to be asked and documented and investigated and determined to figure out how big of an impact is this change on the organization. Now, to me, that really makes a lot of sense. Some people like to have a very robust tool that looks at external factors and everything. I prefer something a little more simple. I like to think about, you know, different pieces of that change. I'm thinking, of course, about my stakeholders and who's external and who's internal. I'm also thinking about whether this change is going to impact all of the stakeholders in the same way, or if there's a lot of variability in the way it's going to impact stakeholders. The more variability there is in our change, that the much more complex it becomes for stakeholder groups. So if we're, you know, let's say we're implementing a new system of some sort, maybe a timekeeping system. Whatever we do to implement that timekeeping system, it's pretty much going to impact the stakeholders across the board in a similar way. Whereas if we're implementing a new organizational structure, right, we've reorganized the company and there's different reporting lines, different groups are part of different functions now. And that is a very complicated change, very complex change because there's so much variability. And it's not as easy to communicate with stakeholders when there's all that variability and all that variation. So, and then the third template that I think is the most important, really, in so many ways, is the communication matrix. Um, it's part of the communication plan, but I like the matrix in the sense that it helps me match who my stakeholders are and what kind of communication that stakeholder group is going to get. And when I have the communication matrix completed, um, and it's of course a work in progress, so there's always some change, there's always some adjustment going forward. But when I really have that completed to my satisfaction, I'm so relieved because now it gives me the ability to look at that matrix and see what types of communication tools are we creating, right? I'm looking to see what types of communication tools we're creating, and then I'm figuring out who is receiving those communication tools. And then I can start to back up that work and do a bit of a deeper dive into, who's creating this communication, who is sending this communication, is it being sent multiple times, uh, and also, who drafts it, who approves it, who says yes, it's ready to go, and who actually does the mechanics of sending. So I think that the communication matrix is the first layer of many layers of communication work and preparation. Um, it is the place where I like to ensure that I have figured out the tools that must be created. And things like emails, I do schedule those in, I'll call them out as email, but then I'll do a complete matrix just for my emails so that I have, like maybe I have a FAQ, maybe I have um, some sort of document that's like a, formal announcement. Maybe we have some technical documents. We have all of these communication tools. But then I'm thinking about the fact that I want to have emails, and those emails may use content from those tools, right? Those emails may be reiterating the content from those tools. So that's what I think is so important on the third piece, is to make sure that communication matrix is completed, and then we start to dive deeper and build all of the actual communications and the tools and the key messaging, that kind of thing. So let me tell you a little bit um, about how I came to my stakeholder assessment. My stakeholder identification and assessment tool lists the name of the stakeholder, the group name. And, a lot of times projects and change initiatives will keep a list of stakeholder groups, and you kind of email them to each other, right? Like, oh, do you have that stakeholder list? And they send you a stakeholder list in an Excel document. And you're like, yeah, that looks pretty good to me. But many times there's missing groups, or we haven't quite parsed it out finely enough to see, how these different groups relate. And so that's where I think you have to begin with our stakeholder identification assessment, really identifying those internal stakeholders, those external stakeholders, and ancillary. And I also think then we want to ensure that in addition to identifying them, we're identifying that current state that they currently live in, right? What's their current state? Do they use this system? What do they use for timekeeping? Do they use, some sort of organizational structure to be able to, cascade information? I'm just guessing. So I'm thinking about the current state for each stakeholder group. So let's say I have stakeholder groups of parents, teachers, and students. Those are three different groups, but there's a lot of variation within those groups, right? And so I'm thinking about what's going on in their current state. And at the end of this change, what does their future state look like? What will be the future for them? So, for example, if I am doing a new system, a new timekeeping system, the current state is I have my current timekeeping system and I love it. It's just fine. And my future state is that I have a new timekeeping system that I eventually will be fine with as well. So that's not such a tremendous change. The tool will change. Maybe the business process around using that tool will change, but the process of tracking time and submitting my time is going to stay essentially the same. So when I'm thinking about, using that current state of my current timekeeping system, my future state of the future timekeeping system, or maybe I don't even have to keep time. Maybe there's been such a transformation that I have a chip that tells everybody when I'm at work and when I'm not. Who knows? But those are the current state and future state. And then I want to think about my stakeholders' perspective. And so to do the stakeholder perspective piece of the stakeholder identification and assessment template, the tool, um, and if you're interested in these, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just send me a note, say tool, please, and tell me which one. We can talk on LinkedIn, and I can share things with you. But ensure that when I'm thinking about the perspective, I want to kind of um, step into the role, step into the mind of the stakeholder. So I want to step into the mind of the teacher who has to keep track of their time, right? And I want to think about, what is that teacher going to gain from this change? They don't have to go log in with a code anymore. Um, or maybe that they are just completely on salary and don't have to worry about any kind of timekeeping. What is it that they lose with this new system? Well, they might lose familiarity. They are losing the fact that they already know how to do something and it's uncomfortable to have to learn something new. And then what do they fear? Well, everybody fears their paycheck being screwed up, right? I think that's a common fear. Money somehow being impacted, your time being impacted. So I'm thinking about that gain, that loss, and that fear for every single stakeholder group. And I'm not just thinking about it myself, I am connecting with stakeholders and asking them questions around what would that be good? How would that be good for you? What's the gain, right? What do you think you're going to lose in this situation? Or maybe what do you think that you fear about this situation? So I'm asking those questions. I'm listening to the responses. I'm gathering those responses, and I'm populating my template, my tool with those responses to help me think. Another reason that I do that is that then I'm going to really focus on looking at that fear column, because that is where I tend to see a lot of resistance. Whenever people feel fearful, they do tend to resist. They're putting up their hands and saying, no, 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 I don't want to go this way. I don't want to do this. And so this fear piece, becoming really familiar with it and recognizing it so that I can plan for how to communicate with others to help them through that fear piece, that's essential. I think it's just essential to have this planning and this thinking about that could be the resistance that's going to be flaring up. The second tool, that change impact assessment, it's more like a checklist tool that has a notes column, and I just put all my notes in that notes column. So I'm looking for things like that go live date. I want to know, how much variability, as we said, variety there is between the different stakeholder groups and their complexity and impact of the change on them. I'm thinking about, are there external factors that are coming in that will impact this change? What other changes are going on in the organization? I'm thinking about that. I'm asking a lot of questions, right, to find the information that I'm populating in my change impact assessment. I also want to look at, um, you know, is there a lot of a big process change? Is there going to be a lot of training involved? Because that has an impact on the cost, the scope of the change. If we have to do a lot of training versus, just a smaller amount of training, or maybe just a show me kind of training. I think also I want to know if there's is this change something that people are looking forward to? Is this something that will be a relief to the stakeholders? Sometimes we're using a really clunky system, and we know for a fact that when we have a more seamless transition, everybody will be relieved, and it will be a big, like, finally, we're all in this better place, this better system. So I think that that can really impact an organization. And then I also am thinking about, is this a change that everyone is dreading or unhappy about? Because sometimes we do have changes that many, many people are unhappy about. Not everybody, but that's seen as like really a loss for the organization. And that's an important piece to understand. So I'm also thinking about numbers, right? How many people are we talking about? Is this thousands of people? Is this hundreds of people? Is this 15 people? All of that is part of that change impact assessment, that we're looking at the impact of the change on the various stakeholder groups, on the variety, also in terms of complexity, variety of the change. But primarily, I want to be able to measure the size of this change and ensure that we are prepared to, we have the capability, we're able to adopt the change, and we're prepared to take it on. So some people say, well, my organization doesn't really have any tools or templates that we use. Like sometimes people have something they pull off the internet and we try it. Um, so what do we do if I don't have anything like that? Well, I have to say, you can start to build your own toolkit. As I mentioned, so many of us have access to AI. And we also have access to change practitioners. So, ACMP, the Association of Change Management Professionals, has a fabulous website. And if you're a member of ACMP, you can post a question on the ACMP Connect board, and people will give you templates and tools that they've used in the past, which is really sweet and very generous. There's also activities also in our library. We have a lot of webinars and a lot of presentations from past conferences from going back to 2011, I think. And so there's all of these tools and templates that are in that area as well. So I think that you can find what you're looking for, you can adapt what you're looking for, you can work with AI to develop what it is you think you need to help you, guide you through the change process. But you want to start with something, because it's really, really difficult to keep track of all of these different groups of individual stakeholders and all these different groups, in terms of their thinking about what they're going to gain, what they're going to lose, what they're fearing about this change. And I'm capturing that all in one place so then I can do my analysis and think about how I'm going to help guide those people through the change process and help them adopt the change. One of the things that I also recommend is training. Anytime that you want to learn more about being a change management practitioner, it's great to pursue training, professional development. Now, ACMP has some conferences and webinars, and actually a masterclass series that begins on October 1st. So that's coming up. I know that also it's important to attend training from either a qualified education provider, which I just have to say I am a qualified education provider, or with a college or university that you are pursuing maybe a postgraduate degree. I think there's a lot of opportunities to find different tools and templates. But the three that I really want to make sure that you're checking the box on is that stakeholder identification and assessment, the change impact assessment, and then that communications matrix, because that's kind of the backbone of your communication plan. So I think that it's really important to have tools and templates to help you and to help as a thought partner. And I don't mind using AI as a thought partner. I think it's a great tool for helping explore different scenarios. What if this were to occur? What could you see as some of the risks? And then just kind of prompting AI to help you develop your thinking around risks, around strengths, around weaknesses, around anything that you feel may put this change initiative in jeopardy, maybe change saturation, or even something along the lines of, just not having a very change mature organization, or not having capability in the organization to adopt change because everybody is so fatigued. So it's important to think about, using these templates, and I would recommend those top three. It's important also to know how to use them to help increase adoption in the change, and really, how to get them accepted in your organization. Now, I have found that one of the best ways to have tools accepted is to start using them and start showing others the insights that you've gained from using these tools. So I would recommend that for you as well. Share with others, ask for feedback, ask for input, ask them what else they tend to use that might be helpful to incorporate into your own tools and templates that you're developing. So, if you are interested in really having a thorough, grounded change management training and formally understanding and learning about organizational change management, feel free to join my Ready Set Change accelerated training and exam prep program. We just started our final 2025 cohort yesterday. And so we do have openings still. If you want to catch up, you can. It's not too late if you joined this week. And if you're not interested in that, you're not able to pursue your change management training at this point in time. We are going to release our 2026 dates in October. So that's exciting. We like to announce them. We'll be announcing our 2026 dates. I have a hint for you. There are three cohorts as usual. And we will be announcing those in October. And we will also open enrollment so that you can sign up to attend one of those three cohort sessions. So I hope this has been helpful to you on how to use tools and templates, which tools and templates I find to be just essential for what I'm doing. In the standard for change management, which is the ACMP standard, in 5.1, evaluate change impact and organizational readiness, there are 15 sub-process groups. And you could create or use a tool and template for each of those 15. But I really think that that is a case of diminishing returns, right? Because you are just using so many tools that you're overwhelmed with data. Sometimes you might be thinking, well, I love details. Well, there's there's a time and place for details, and we can't overdo details too much. So, just recognize the fact that you want to pick 3 to 5 tools per process group that are helpful to you, or that are maybe kind of iterative, and you're bringing it back and you're using that tool for more information. So that's what you need. You don't need 15 tools. You don't need 45 templates. What you need is a clear simple, understandable process for leading change, which is the READY framework, and then the tools and templates that go along with that. And I'm happy to share those. Just send me a note on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at april@springboard-consult.com. And I really appreciate talking with you today. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.